Okay guys, so today we're going to take a look at the raw camera settings inside of Photoshop. So we'll start by opening up a raw image. And the first question you might have is, what makes a raw image different from any other kind of image? And the answer is file size. When a camera takes a photo and converts it into a JPEG, it's basically compressing the image. And compressing is another way of saying that it is taking information away from the image. And what happens when you do that is you lose flexibility in post-production. And that's what we're talking about here. We're in post-production inside of Photoshop. We're making changes to an image. Now, what happens when you shoot in a raw format is you skip that entire compression stage. Now, the result is your images are a lot bigger. Like a JPEG might be anywhere from 1 to 5 megabytes. Most of the stuff that we export for web use is right around 1 megabyte, maybe 2 at the most. Whereas, depending on the size of the sensor in your camera, a raw image could be anywhere from 30 to 60 megabytes. Which is something you want to be aware of because it's going to eat up your storage a lot faster. But the benefit is that you retain all sorts of information in the file that can be brought out later. Things like white balance, things like exposure information. Whereas, if you've ever taken a shot at night on your iPhone and it's dark and you might try to brighten it up a little bit and you realize real quick that it just starts looking worse the more you try to brighten it up. That's a great example of a highly compressed image that just doesn't have a lot of data beyond what you're seeing. Whereas what you're looking at right now is a raw image. I shot this in the skate park in Encinitas, and as you can see, my flash didn't go off. And because of that, we have a really underexposed image with a lot of highlights from the sun. As we can see over here, we're just borderline overexposed on his face. But notice, because there's no flash, the other side is completely dark. So before we get too far into making adjustments, I just want to show you that the camera raw tools that we're going to be working with don't have to be used exclusively with raw images. Meaning that if you like these tools, you can absolutely use them on JPEGs or PNGs or TIFFs. Just realize that, if I try to brighten something up 6 stops that's on a compressed JPEG, it's just not going to work. I'm not going to have the range of flexibility with a JPEG that I would have with a raw image. And so what you can see here is I've opened this image inside of Photoshop, and as you can see, it hasn't taken me to the regular Photoshop workspace. It's taken me to the raw workspace. And I'm going to show you, before I get into this, how this works. So Photoshop instantly recognizes when something is raw, and it will open it in the raw, what's called camera raw. And you'll see that if you look over here on the right, we have a couple options here. We can choose cancel, done, or open. If I choose cancel, it just closes the image, nothing changes. If I make some changes, like I come over here and maybe brighten this up a little bit, and I hit done, it will close the image too. But if I open this file again, you will see these changes in the file. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. And if I hit open right here, it's going to open it up inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And click open. And now you can see that it's brought me into the regular workspace of Photoshop. I have a layer over on the side, just like you would expect. So essentially, Camera Raw is like a step that you generally do before you do any real significant Photoshop work. But I think that's kind of a misnomer because I tend to jump in and out of Camera Raw all the time. If I'm working on a JPEG or a raw image and I want to use the tools in Camera Raw, I'll absolutely hop back into Camera Raw to adjust the shadows or the highlights or any of the tools that are in Camera Raw. So what I want to do right now is give you this image, and we're going to walk through most of the settings in Camera Raw. And we're going to basically try to fix this image up using some modern techniques. Now, before I get into Camera Raw, I want to point out two things. If I come up to Image and I go to Adjustments, you'll see a bunch of adjustments over here. Brightness, levels, contrast, exposure, vibrance, saturation, all things that I use on a regular basis. What's important to understand about these options under the Image Adjustments drop-down is that these are all permanent, meaning that it's, other than making a quick change and then hitting Command Z to undo it, if I make an exposure change and then I go do 5 more things, it's very difficult for me to go back and just undo that exposure change. So these are, again, these are things that you really can't undo once you've done them. Now, it's also worth mentioning that if we come down to the lower right side of the screen and we go down to this little circle that's half black and half white, and I click that, you're going to see almost all the same settings here, but these are going to be adjustment layers. And let me just show you an example real quick. So if I come over here and I go to Image, Adjustment, and I come to Exposure, you see that I get an exposure slider, and I might opt to brighten up the image, which, as you can see, really just doesn't look very good, right? You can see we're getting a lot of banding right in here, and that is partially because we're zoomed in, because this is actually a very large image. So you can see that spreads out the banding a little bit. But the point is that if I click OK, notice that we don't see anything on our layer. And let me slide this over here so you can see a little better. We don't see anything. We don't see a change that we could undo later down the road. So if I go ahead and make more changes to this, going back and undoing that exposure change is going to be virtually impossible. And so, or at least not something that's easily done. So I'm going to hit Command Z and undo that. Now if I come down over here to my adjustment layers and I choose the exact same thing, exposure, notice that when I click this, it adds the adjustment layer above the image. And then here in my properties, I have all those same controls. And I can brighten the adjustment as much as I want. I can play with the offset or the gamma correction. And the good news is, if I do 50 more things, I can always come over to this this adjustment layer and just turn off the eyeball. And that basically turns off this effect. And if I know for certain that I don't want to use it, I can just drag it down to the trash. Okay? And one more thing that's actually really cool about adjustment layers is this icon right here is the adjustment layer. So you'll notice, let's grab a different one just so you can see the difference in the icons. If I come over and grab Vibrance, notice how exposure has this plus and minus icon, Vibrance has this triangle icon. Well, that is the sign for that adjustment layer. Now I'm going to throw away the Vibrance one. So the cool thing though is that they come with a mask built in. All right, so this is the effect, and then this is the mask. And you might be thinking, well, what's the mask for? Well, let's come over and make an adjustment here. So let's say we come over here, and what are we going to do? I have this adjustment layer selected, and maybe I think, okay, I need to brighten up this area, but I don't want to brighten up this area, right? Because it's already, let me zoom in a little bit here. It's already very bright over here where the sun is, but I definitely want to affect this area. Well, if I increase the exposure, it's increasing it for the entire image. But what the mask would allow me to do would be to control where that exposure is happening, meaning that I could grab a brush and I could remove this exposure effect by painting out part of this over here, which probably sounds more complicated than it is. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to hit the B key and I'm going to get a brush. Okay, And I'm going to use the right bracket key to make that brush bigger. And I'm also going to come up over here where it says 900 in the upper left corner. And I'm going to hit that drop down, and I'm going to look at the hardness of the brush. Right now it's very hard, which means I'm going to get a hard edge. If I set this to black and I come over here and select the mask and then start to essentially just remove the exposure effect. That's all I'm doing. You can see this little black area right here. I've just painted out part of this exposure effect. If I turn the eyeball off, you can see that it's just removing the visibility of the effect from this portion. So in this case, I'm going to undo the paint out. There you go. In this case, if I come over here and use a soft brush and I drop the hardness down to 0, you'll notice that I can paint it out a lot more, it'll blend better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So now if I come over and paint, you're not seeing those hard edges like you were. It's still removing the exposure effect from the photograph, but, you can see it's blending better. Is it perfect? Not even close. But it is doing a better job of blending. So, again, this isn't exactly how I would handle it, but I could make this brush nice and big and maybe just try to click kind of like right there. Notice I just clicked once, and you can see that, again, it's pretty tough to blend because this image is so poorly exposed. But you can see just by clicking once, I'm darkening in these areas, but I'm still leaving the exposure effect on the subject. It's not enough to fix the image, but it is improving. And if you look down here at the mask, you can see that the black areas are the areas where I've removed the effect, and the white areas are the areas where the exposure effect is still active, which is on my subject. If I turn the eyeball on and off, you can see the difference. Now, since we're talking about masks, it's also worth mentioning that maybe I want to do the opposite. Maybe I want to, rather than painting out the effect, maybe I want to paint it in. And to do that is really easy. All you have to do is select the effect, make some change. As you can see, I've brightened it up here. Let's brighten it up a little bit more. Okay, it's getting pretty blown out and pretty crunchy, but for the sake of example. So right now it's doing it to the entire image. And again, I can use a black brush to remove portions of it. Oops, I got to make sure I click on the mask before I click with the black brush. So again, I can remove portions of this exposure effect. But a really cool other way to do this would be to invert the mask. And what that means is, rather than applying the effect to the entire image and then painting out the areas where you don't want the effect, you do the opposite. Let's see, sorry, I think I went back one too far. You would do this. Instead of painting out the effect, you come over to the mask, you click on it to select it, and you hit Command I. And that is the invert key command. So what I've done is I've added the effect, but I've inverted it. So now rather than it affecting everything and me removing it from where I don't want it, I can do the opposite and I can paint in the effect. So what I want to use now, instead of using a black brush, because you can see I've blacked out the mask, I want to use a white brush. Now, you'll see I've got black and white loaded into my foreground and background color. If I hit the X key, it will reverse those. So watch the colors here as I hit the X key. You can see now white is in the front and black is in the back. And what that means is that my brush is now a white brush. And now, if I come over here and click, you can see that it's adding the brightness in just to the subject. I have control of where I want to lighten that up. So I really hope this makes sense, because this is an incredibly powerful tool inside of Photoshop. And you saw that I used a big brush there. Well, if I hit Command Z a few times, and maybe instead of using a big brush, I feel like getting really detailed, I can come over here and use the left bracket key to scale my brush down, and maybe I just want to lighten up the subject. Well, if I feel like it, I could, well, again, you can see I'm getting this weird glow around the edge. It looks pretty bad. But maybe there's just portions of this that I want to come in and lighten up. Lighten up his t-shirt. And again, to really do this, you'd want to zoom in pretty close, use a smaller brush, and really pay attention to detail. But the point is that I could come in and paint in this exposure effect. And, you know, maybe I just want to get his face. So that is really, you know, that's a pro tip right there. That's how professionals do color image retouching, is they do it in little spots with very small brushes rather than just hitting the whole image with a big giant brush. Now again, as you can see, I'm getting this weird light blue line. So what I could do if I really wanted to take this to the next level was I could select him out of the image, put him on his own layer, apply this effect. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. I just want you to understand the concept of inverting a mask to allow you to paint in the effect rather than just applying the effect and then having to paint it out where you don't want it. Let me give you just another quick example to drive this home. I'm going to drag that to the trash. We'll come back to the adjustment layers, and what could I do? I could add in something like, oh, let's see. What would work? Again, any of these really would work. I could do brightness contrast, which is going to be very similar to exposure. Again, there's the little icon for the effect. There's the mask, and right above it in the properties panel is the brightness slider. Or better yet, rather than doing this, let's do a hue saturation. So in this case, I come back here. I'm going to grab hue and saturation. And again, there's the effect, there's the mask, and there's the controls. Let's go ahead and desaturate the entire image. And just like that, we now have a black and white image. Well, again, I could decide, I want him to be in color. And since I have a white mask, I would use a black brush to remove the mask. So maybe zoom in a little bit, hit the X key to reverse my black and white so that I'm using a black brush. And then I could come in here and basically paint the color back in. And as you can see, I'm doing this sort of down and dirty. I would definitely take the time to zoom in and really watch my edges, because if you get the blue sky in there, it kind of ruins the whole effect. But the concept is pretty straightforward, right? I can paint in this effect. And again, it just gives me control. And that's something I'm always looking for when I'm doing creative work, is to be able to have lots of control. Now, obviously, I went over the edges too far there, so I could hit the X key and switch it to a white brush. And I could zoom in, shrink my brush down, and I could try to remove all the sky that I added in there. In this case, using a slightly harder brush would probably make things easier, since I now have a little more of a defined edge. And I'm not going to sit here and paint out all the sky. I'm just trying to show you guys that if I wanted to have him in color and the rest of the image in black and white, this would be a pretty feasible way to do this effect. Right, so you see what's going on here. The adjustment layer is staying in the image. I am painting in the areas that I want in color. And really, it's just easy to remember that black reveals and white conceals. So I used black to add in the saturation, and I'm using white to remove it from the areas where I don't want it. Cool. And that would give me that effect. Now again, if I inverted it, clicked I, or Command I, and that's going to be Control I on a PC, then it's going to turn him black and white and turn the background into color. Let's go ahead and do that. And there you go. You can see now our subject is black and white, and the background is color. this is the type of editing I do probably more than anything inside of Photoshop. I love all the compositing and all the fun creative stuff, but as a photographer, fixing images is kind of the main thing. So that was a little side note about using adjustment layers versus using the image adjustments up here. I would not recommend using any of these unless you have to. Things like replace color and equalize only exist up here, so you will have to use those from up here. But everything else, like brightness, contrast, and levels, and all this stuff is all available down here in the lower right as adjustment layers. So for that reason, always use adjustment layers. There's no benefit to using permanent effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this effect here. I'm just going to drag it to the trash. Let's say that I'm working on this image and I want to send it into Camera Raw. And let's, if maybe it's a JPEG and I just want to use the Camera Raw settings, or maybe I made some changes in Camera Raw but I want to take it back and do more. There's really two ways to send an image back to Camera Raw after you've opened it into Photoshop. So again, if you're using a JPEG, it's never going to open in Camera Raw. That's only going to happen if you're using a raw image, which this is. But like I said, you can absolutely use Camera Raw on any type of image. You just can't push it quite as far. So I can go up to Image. No, I can go up to Filters. And you'll see Camera Raw Filter right there. But it's also got a key command, and that's what I recommend getting familiar with. And that's just Shift Command A or Shift Control A on a PC. So I'm going to use the key command, but remember, if you forget it, you can always go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. So Shift Command A, give it a second, and boom, now we're back into Camera Raw. So there's a couple things that are helpful, and there's a lot of tools in Camera Raw. And to take it a step further, if you use Adobe Lightroom, generally these are the tools you're going to have to work with. Lightroom is for dealing with large amounts of photos, like say you go shoot a wedding and you shoot 400 photos. You don't want to have to open those individually into Photoshop when all you're doing is making exposure adjustments and maybe reframing it a little bit or cropping it. So Adobe Lightroom, which probably isn't open, but I have it right here. I'm not going to open it. Essentially gives you, it's kind of like a cross between Adobe Bridge and Camera Raw. It will give you these settings for every image. And there's a bunch of stuff over here on the side that is really sophisticated. It's not super simple. I mean, it's not difficult, but it's not, I'm just saying that there's a lot of tools at your disposal. So first off, let's take a look at this thing right here. This is our histogram. And interestingly enough, watch when I hover over, you see how I get these little gray blocks? You can actually click and drag right in the histogram. And what it's doing is it's brightening up my exposure. See how it says exposure 1.59? That means I just brightened up my exposure by 1.5 stops. And even though you can't see the slider, if I come down here and open up the light slider and look at my exposure, you can see 1.59. So interestingly enough, like let's say I come over here and I see that my white has gone all the way up this side over here. And what that means is that it's overexposed. When this line over here, your whites are on the right and your blacks are on the left, when this line hits and goes straight up, that means you have clipped details, meaning that they're overexposed, and quite honestly, you can't usually get them back. But and that's generally a bad thing depending on the photo. Sometimes it might make sense to have your whites totally blown out, but not really in this photo. So I could click right here and kind of drag to the left. And you can see that while it's not completely fixing it, it does look better. It's taken down those brightest whites on his face and over here a little bit. And as you can see, it's also moved my whites slider, -62. So again, just pointing out the fact that you can either use these sliders right here, Or you could just put your mouse right up here and say, oh, my shadows seem a little dark. I'm going to drag them to the right. And that's going to kind of lighten up some of this dark area over here, kind of, where the sun was silhouetting everything. And if we take a second and look, I mean, all of a sudden we've got a much better image. It's not perfect, but it's better pretty quickly. So you can see that there's a couple reasons why I like using Camera Raw to make my changes. Let's undo all that. So that's the histogram. And again, the histogram isn't just for making adjustments. It's really for letting you know where your values lie. With no changes to this image, you can see most of the information is in the blacks. And there's definitely some information in the whites. And these two little diamonds up here let you know when you're clipping. If I click that and turn it on, it turns on the highlight warning. So you can see this red area over here is where I've completely blown out the image. There is no detail left, and I probably can't bring any detail back. If I were to brighten up the whites, you'll see that red expand, because I'm basically just expanding the amount of blown out area. But if I take it down, does it go away? Not really, because like I said, once you blow out your highlights in a photo, you really can't bring them back. If I come over to the other side, and I click on the little black one, you'll notice we don't really have, maybe right here, do we have some clipped areas? I'm not seeing any warnings. So I think we are basically, what that basically means is that we still have detail information even in our shadows. And if I come over and I open up my shadows, maybe even pop the exposure, you can see, look at, there's all the tread on his shoe. Everything that was basically pitch black a minute ago now has information. And that is entirely the benefit of shooting in Camera Raw. I probably couldn't do that with most JPEGs. Okay, so with that said, now that we've got a little grasp on the histogram, we understand that anything that's, if I grab the black slider and take it to the left, you see these blue areas? This is telling us that I have now completely clipped my blacks in these areas. And there's no detail visible. If I turn off the warning, you can see that it's pretty much pitch black. Now again, I had to slide the black slider over to make that happen, but I just wanted you to see what was going on there. So, and also notice it lights up, but as I take the blacks to the right, it kind of turns off. As soon as it realizes that there's nothing clipped, it turns that off. Okay. So moving on, you can also see right under here, it tells me all my photo information. I was shooting at ISO 100. I was using a 16mm lens, shooting at f7.1 with a shutter speed of 1/500. Moving down, you'll see that we have under edit right here. I could let Photoshop fix this for me. I could just put my mouse right over auto and click it. And as you can see, does a pretty good job, right? Definitely got us in the ballpark. And you can see it went over here and dropped my shadows, took the blacks down a little, increased my overall exposure. I don't generally, sometimes I don't mind hitting auto and then I kind of go in and fine tune the rest of it myself. But so auto is a good thing. It's usually a good place to start. If I wanted to desaturate the whole image, I could click black and white. But I'll show you in a second that there's a saturation slider I can use as well. So let's undo those and Command Z back, and we'll turn off our clipping highlights. And what else? So we've got, essentially we can come in here, and for now let's go ahead and click auto and look at our image. And the reason that you can't solely rely on auto is because it's averaging the entire image. And the reality is I care a lot more about my subject than I do about, this area over here against the wall or maybe the background. I want to make sure my subject looks good. And so for that reason, I might drop the shadows just a little bit more to bring back a little detail in my subject. Also notice that we're pretty close to being overexposed here. So dropping the highlights tends to help bring back some of that information there And that would also allow me to maybe pop the exposure just a little bit further and zoom out, take a look. It's looking better. It's definitely looking in the ballpark, so to speak. I probably don't want to take the shadows too much further. If you take the shadows and the highlights all the way down, you end up getting kind of a weird look to your image. If you do that and you crank up like the sharpness or the clarity, you'll find your images start to look almost a little cartoony. So I'm going to bring back the shadows just a touch and bring back the highlights just a little bit. That doesn't mean you can't ever take them all the way down. Just be careful. And at this point, my blacks are looking a little washed out, so I'm going to push those to the left just a touch to bring back a little bit of the crispness to the blacks. And at that point, I mean, I think we're looking at a way better exposed image. But we've got additional controls here, so let's run through them and take a look. Now, before I move on, this is all in the lighting section, and there's a little eyeball here that will allow me to turn it off. If I hold the mouse down and then let go. So I can see before and after. And obviously it's a huge improvement. Let's go ahead and check out the next options, and we'll kind of zip through these ones because the lighting one is definitely the most important. But if I open up color, that is going to give me essentially my color balancing tools. The first one you see is the white balance. If I shot it a little bit too cool, I can always slide this temperature slider over to the right just a little bit. And, you know, if I take it way far, you can see now it looks like we're in the desert. If I take it this way, cools down the entire image to a kind of a comical look. So you want to be careful with this. I think in this situation, I could probably warm this up just a little bit. I don't want to go too far because I don't want to turn the skin tones crazy orange. But I find that the overall image was a little bit blue, and by warming it up just a touch, it feels like it just gives it a little more versatility. We got a lot of blue skies up there, a lot of blue tiles, a lot of blue t-shirts. So it's nice to add just a little bit of orange in there to get just a touch of contrast, color speaking wise. All right, the next thing we have is the tint. Now, depending on the type of camera you have, some cameras tint a little bit green, some tint a little bit magenta, and this is just an easy way to fix that. I know my Blackmagic video camera tints a little green, so you might shift that slightly towards the magenta. In this case, I don't think I really want to go too far one way or the other. I'll probably leave it at 0. But it is worth mentioning that this is a good way to get a look. So if I take it over here, notice we kind of get that vintage washed out greenish blue look. Or if I take it over here, you kind of get almost like a faded film color or just a tweaked color film look. But in this case, I'm just going to leave that at 0. Now, when I clicked auto, it automatically put my vibrance at 12. And vibrance is just a way to punch up the colors without messing up your skin tones. People ask, what's the difference between vibrance and saturation? And the answer is vibrance is way more sensitive to retaining accurate skin tones. So notice we can go a little higher with that, whereas if I cranked up my saturation, look at the skin tones now. You can see, I mean, he's pretty much red now from cranking up that saturation. Whereas, I think it had it at 3. Whereas, I can pop that up to about 12. I could even go higher. And notice the skin tones look pretty decent, even at 46. I'll bring that back a little bit. Okay, so that is color. And moving on, effects. So we have texture, clarity, dehaze, vignette, and grain. Let's look at each one of them real quick. So texture is basically the updated version of clarity. Clarity is an effect that got beaten to death in the early 2000s. It is essentially a way to sharpen an image by cranking up the contrast. And so if I come over here and crank the clarity, you can see that it gets a lot sharper, but if you really zoom in, we're really messing up the image by doing that. It just gets really crunchy looking. So I'm going to go ahead and take that back down. Texture is a lot more sensitive to skin tones. So notice I can crank the texture and you can see it's sharpening there. Again, I try not to use much of either of these on people. If I'm shooting landscapes or macro, photography, I might use texture just to get a little bit more sharpness. But I really don't use them much on people. That doesn't mean you can't. I just don't. So if I was going to use one, I would definitely use texture. I almost never use clarity because it's just, unless the image is totally washed out, clarity is almost too strong. Dehaze. In this case, we do have a little bit of haze because the camera is kind of looking directly into the sun. And whenever you have the sun pointing into your camera, it's going to soften your contrast. It didn't really affect him too much, but you'll see if I use dehaze, it just kind of takes away that white glow that you get when you're getting light directly into your lens. Notice how the bloom of this highlight over here gets smaller as I take this to the right. But it's also messing with my exposure, so I'm not going to use it. And then finally, vignette. Basically just darkens or lightens kind of the edges. If I take it to the right, it adds white vignette. So if I was going to do like wedding photos or something, you might consider a little bit of that. If I take it to the left, then I get a darker vignette. Go easy on this, if at all. I never take my vignette past -10. And the reason is because it's not the best vignette. There's other ways to do it that I think are better, but it always just looks a little slapped on in post if you take it too far. At first, I think everybody kind of gets a little infatuated with this look, and then you realize, oh God, what have I done to all my photos with this heavy vignetting? I'm probably better off, if you want to draw attention to the subject in the center, or if you have some really bright edges, then a vignette can help with that. But I'm just telling you from experience, don't take it too far. Unless that's what you're looking for. And we also have grain. I almost never add grain to my photos. I like digital photos to look sharp. But if you're looking for a film look, you can crank that up. And as you can see, it starts to add in grain. But it's digital grain, and we're just trying to emulate the look of film, but I didn't shoot this on film, so I'm not going to do that. I much prefer the sharpness of just the digital look. But if you're trying to get a retro look, grain might give you what you're looking for. Moving on. Curves. Curves are great. Everybody swears by them. I don't use them very much, but essentially it gives you control of each one of the main colors as well as the overall contrast. And the idea is that if you put your mouse in the upper right corner and you drag to the left, we can increase the highlights and just sort of have control over those highlights. And you can see exactly what's happening on those sliders underneath. It's just giving you different ways to target essentially the same things we did in the light section. But there are a lot of photographers and editors that love using curves exclusively. If I come over and click the red button, now it's going to apply that specifically to my red tint. And if I, the traditional thing that we see in curves is what's called an S curve. And the way you do that is you click there and then you come click down here. And you lift this one up just a little bit. And you bring this one down just a touch. And you start to get some pretty interesting color looks. You can also click the bottom and slide that over. And you can see that that's just adding color to my darker areas. If I do it up here, it's adding it to the lighter areas. And if I take this down, it's removing it from the lighter areas. Or it's adding more of the blue than the orange, than the red. And again, you can go and do that for all of these different colors, but not generally part of my workflow. Again, it's super popular and most editors do love to use this. So get in there and experiment a little bit. And you can use this eyeball to toggle between your changes and use it to get some creative effects. Then we get down to the color mixer, and that's going to be three things. Your hue, saturation, and luminance. So it says color mixer, mixer, adjust. And if I open this up, HSL is hue, saturation, and luminance. Color would be just a specific color. And notice right here it says hue, saturation, and luminance. So for example, let's say that I feel like my blues are a little oversaturated and there's just too much blue in this image. I could come down and set this to saturation, come down to my blues or my aquas, and I could just desaturate them a little bit. As you can see, it just takes all that blue punch out of the sky. So again, if you're going for a specific look and you don't want it to be super saturated, then desaturating some colors might get you that look. If you go to hue, and maybe you want the sky to be more of a light blue, sort of a turquoise, then sometimes you might slide your aquas over here just a little bit, and maybe take your blues over here. And you can see it gives us this sort of teal sky look, which seems to be really popular these days with a lot of photo effects. So that would be under hue, and it just gives you the ability to shift your colors one way or the other. And then luminance is just the brightness of your colors. So again, we've got a bright blue sky. If I take the blue slider, I can darken that blue up. And it does a pretty good job of targeting the color. And I could do the same with the aquas. Or maybe I choose to lighten the aquas up and darken the blues. Again, these are all just tools for creativity, so use them however you see fit. Moving on, color grading. Now this is a tool that's going to allow us to put certain colors in our midtones, highlights, and shadows, and then it gives us sliders so that we can adjust those. And essentially, one of the most popular looks over the last 20 years has been pushing orange into your highlights and teal or blue into your shadows. You see this in like the movie Transformers. They do this in like every scene. And it just creates a little more contrast, right? Because now we have more of that. Let's go real far with it. We have more of the orange in our highlights. And let's see, I'll move this one as well. So again, these are just for color grading. Now, the difference between color grading and color correction is when you color grade, you're going for a look. When you color correct, you're just trying to get your white balance accurate. So again, I'm not using color grading all that much unless the image really needs it, and I don't think this one does. Then we go down to detail, and this is going to be sharpening and noise reduction. So let's zoom way in here. And let's see, do we have noise? You don't usually get noise on sunny days. You'll tend to find more noise in your low light shots, but every image has a certain amount of noise. And in this case, we're gonna have to zoom in real close to see it. And you can see we're almost at the pixel view here. So if I grab the noise reduction and let's just crank it up to like 50, you can see it basically just smooths out the detail. If I go real far with it, you can see it's almost blurring the image. Noise reduction can be good if you have harsh lighting on your subject and it's maybe highlighting a little too much detail in the skin, right? Like, notches and things like that, or just age lines. Noise reduction can give you a little facelift, right? It can clean up some of that stuff if you choose to use it for that. It also works well in removing noise from noisy images. But again, I don't think this is a terribly noisy image, so I probably don't need much, maybe just a touch of noise reduction. And by a touch, I mean 24, somewhere around there. Sharpening, though, I do like sharp images, and so I do tend to use this a lot. If I have an image with a shallow depth of field with a blurred out background, then I don't usually apply sharpening to the entire image. And the way you can avoid applying it to the entire image is by using a mask. Now, we just talked about masks inside of Photoshop, but I'm going to show you a different way to mask right inside of Camera Raw. So if I come up to the right over here and I select this little circle icon, if I hover over it, it says masking. So if I click on it, it opens up the masking window. And you'll notice I have options. I can mask the subject, where we will try to select the subject all by itself, and then I'll have a set of sliders I can use. I can try to select the sky or the background. So let's go ahead and select the subject and see how good of a job it does. So I'm just going to click that button, and you can see that the red area is the area that it thinks is the subject. Now, just like every automated task, it's almost never perfect, but it's close. It did a good job selecting him. It just selected some additional unwanted areas. So the nice thing is, if you look up here, there's the mask. It says mask number 1. I can turn the eyeball on and off. I used a subject mask, but I also have the ability to add to that mask or to subtract from it. And if I choose subtract, it's going to ask me, how do I want to subtract? Do I want to use some automated stuff? And in my situation, I just want to use a brush and do it myself. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now I have a brush that will subtract. So obviously all of these red areas, if I hit the right bracket key and bring this up, I can subtract all of this unwanted area. Notice the circle around the outside. That's the feather area. So you can see right here it says feather. If I turn that down, notice how that outer circle is now a lot smaller. So now if I come over here, it's not feathering anything. Now, it did a good job on him, but it also selected the area between his feet. So I'm going to shrink down my brush and just come in here and kind of do a rough, maybe turn the feather up just a little bit and try to quickly remove all of this. Because any changes I make to the exposure or to the sharpness are going to affect the area in here, and that just looks weird. So there we go. We got a pretty quick and pretty accurate mask in almost no time by just going to the mask button and setting it to subject. If I wanted to create a second mask, I could go to create new mask and I could select the sky. Let's do that. Select the sky. So now the sky is selected, and if I come over here and I drop the exposure, notice how it's only making the sky darker. So pretty good with these auto selections. But that's not what I wanted to do, so I'll Command Z that. Or just, I can come up here to where it says mask. I can go to these 3 dots and I can choose delete. I want to delete mask 2. So I'll choose that one. So I still have mask 1, and that's the one where I am now going. Now, just to be clear, once you add a mask, it takes you into a set of adjustments that will only affect the area being masked. Okay, so now what you're seeing right here is mask 1. There's exposure and light and all of that stuff. Do I want to mess with any of that? Maybe take the shadows down just a little bit. Maybe bring the whites up just a touch to kind of make him pop out of the image a little bit. Because now it's not affecting everything else, it's just affecting him. I could even drop the highlights just a little bit to try to bring back some of that detail on his face. And even maybe add just a touch of contrast to just keep everything nice and crunchy and looking good. And then what I was going to do last was I was going to go down to detail. I'll turn off light. I'm sorry, we'll go to effects. No, we'll go to detail. And I will increase the sharpness. And that's all I really need to do. And now I've basically added that to just him because he is currently masked selected. Now if I want to go back to the unmasked portion of this image and stay inside of Camera Raw, I just need to go all the way up here and click on these little sliders because that's going to take me back to the non-masked area. If I want to get back to the mask, I can click on this circle, and now I'm back in the masking area, and I could go in and, again, just for example, if I select this mask and I grab the exposure slider, notice how it's only affecting the masked out area. but I don't want to do that. So click this button right up here in the upper right. It looks like 3 little sliders. It says edit if you hover over it, or you could just hit the E key, and that takes you back to regular unmasked camera raw. So let's move down. Just a couple left to do and we're done here. And then we're just going to make a few final adjustments to this image, and we'll turn this in through Canvas. So let's go down to optics. Now this is going to allow me to fix distortion. You can see if I slide that. Now this was shot with a fisheye lens, and it does have a little bit of a bulge going forwards, like this type of bulge. So if I wanted to reduce that a little bit, I could. I don't really think I need to, but I could. And notice that now we have these edges where it's kind of exposing part of the photo. So I could go up to this tool up here. Not geometry. Where is the crop tool? I guess it doesn't. We don't have one in here. There's one inside of. Photoshop. So yeah, you don't need to have one inside of Camera Raw. Anyways, I'm not going to do that, so we can skip over that. I could then use the vignette. Notice it's pretty much doing the same thing as the other vignette. I'm not going to do that either. Lens blur. Now this one's controversial. This is kind of like the portrait filter on your iPhone, and what it does is it gives you shallow depth of field blur, but it does it in a way that is not, well, how do you say it? It's kind of gross sometimes. I mean, it might help, so I'll show you what it is. If I click apply, it's going to basically allow me to blur out the background. And so if you look down here where it says focus range, notice there's the foreground and the background, and this is sort of the midground. So I'm going to grab this slider in an attempt to show you what this is doing, and I'm going to slide it so hopefully just our subject is in focus. And there we go. I probably went way too far, but you can see what's happening. It's giving you shallow depth of field blur right inside of Camera Raw in post-production. Now I shot this at f7.1 with a wide angle lens, so there is very little, if any, natural depth of field blur going on. So if you need that look, you can get it with this. I would just say use it sparingly, because it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes like the area in between the legs won't get blurred out because it doesn't see that as being part of the background. But again, it's a tool. Use it however you like. I would, if I was going to apply it, I would expand it back out a little bit to try to get his face back in focus. But not something I use often unless there is something really bad in the background that I want to get rid of, and I have no other method of doing it. You can also select the background using a mask and blur it out that way. So again, experiment with this. You have different styles of bokeh, and that's what happens to lights that are thrown out of focus. They take on this interesting shape, and you can kind of pick different shapes: oval, cat's eye. So experiment with this, and you can also turn on depth visualizer, and that's kind of cool. So now it's showing me what it's seeing for depth. And notice how for some reason this purple right here, which is part of the background, is right on top of my subject, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you can see that in order to keep him in focus, I could extend the front and maybe even extend this a little bit into the purple area here. So again, play around with these. Lens blur, not something I generally use a lot of, so I'm going to turn it off. And then finally, calibration. And this is the final tool in here. And calibration is, again, a tool to help calibrate the color of your camera. So if your camera tints a little bit to one hue, you can undo that by taking this the opposite direction. But it's also kind of just a fun tool to play around with to get interesting colors. Like, for example, if I wanted to punch up sort of the teal and orange look of this image, I could grab the hue slider and maybe take it to the left, and you can see how it's turning all my blues kind of like a teal color, and that orange in the skin is really starting to pop now. Again, this is an extreme example, but maybe I just want to take it, you know, just a little bit, like maybe 5 or 6, and then maybe pop up the saturation just a touch. Like I said, it's just a way to kind of give your images a unique look. I would recommend not taking it too far, but as you can see, you know, this one's really affecting the skin tones. All right, so that's pretty much everything that we need to cover in Camera Raw. Let's take a quick look at the sidebar over here. So I'm up in the very top in the upper right, and on the first one we have the editing tools. That's what we just went through. Below that is geometry, and that allows us to tilt the image. So, you know, if I'm shooting an image of a tall building and I have to tilt my camera backwards to get the top of the building, what'll end up happening is you'll get perspective shifting, and it'll make the top of the building smaller. So sometimes you might use this to correct something like that. You can also use it to rotate and do all sorts of little things. You can scale up your image and offset the X and Y. So controls. And there's more as well that you can play with over here. We'll go ahead and move on. Then we have the stamp tool, which I would definitely recommend just using the one in Photoshop. This one is okay for removing certain things. Let's see here. I'm going to use the healing tool, and let's see if we can take out this airplane. So I'm going to shrink it way down. I'm going to click and just select and drag over it, and it should heal that right up. So if you have spots on your sensor, which I feel like I almost always do, this is a great tool for removing them. Although I'm not really seeing too many spots from the sensor right now. If you have dust on your sensor, yeah, it looks pretty good. So that is some built-in removal tools. Spot clone tool, you can clone a specific area. And again, these all exist right inside of Photoshop. I'm going to go back to this and turn this off because I can see I've got some little white edges there. I feel like if I double click, now I'll just type in 0 and hit return. There we go. Okay, so we went through the mask tools, and then we have this one right here. This is red eye removal. I haven't gotten red eye in a photo in years, so I'm not sure how relevant that is, but if you have a photo and your subject has red glowing pupils, you can use this to remove that. The auto setting actually works pretty well. This last one right here are a bunch of presets. And when I say a bunch, I mean a bunch. Let's go to Auto Retro. Open that up, and we can click and add presets. That one, AR03, you can see that desaturated it quite a bit. AR10 adds in some purple. And there are tons of these to play with. Cinematic, grab one of those. There you go. There's that teal sky that I was talking about. So preset looks, just like Instagram filters or any other type of preset filter look that you might want to play with. I'm going to take them all off because I don't want them. But again, nothing wrong with them. Lots of people use these, and the cool thing is, if I make changes with one of these, if I add one of these, it will change the sliders in my edit window. So sometimes you can start with a filter and then kind of go back and fine tune it back in the light or color window. So filters are great, and it comes with a ton of them, so feel free to play around with these. And we got 3 little dots right there. Nothing, oh, we can add new presets. So if you go in and make a bunch of changes to an image and you feel like you're going to apply those to multiple other images, you can literally click Create Preset, and it will copy all of the changes so far that we've made to this image and allow us to create a new preset based on those changes. So if you're shooting, people in a studio and you're getting maybe a weird color cast in all of your images, you could quickly make a preset to fix that and then just apply that to all of the images rather than having to do it with the sliders. Cool, so that's pretty much everything that we need to talk about inside of Camera Raw. I hope that helped. Now let's go ahead and click OK. And let's fix a couple things with this image, and we will turn in this as our assignment for this week. So the first thing I notice is that my horizon is really crooked. If I bring down a guide and I put it right here, and we just look at the top of the bowl, you can see that it is tilted heavily. I believe in straightening out my horizons. Even though you could make the argument that this area right over here is pretty accurate, I still don't like that sloping horizon. So I'm going to go up and grab the crop tool. And if I turn it on, there's a couple ways that you can do this. You can use some of the auto settings, but quite honestly, if you have a guide right there, it's pretty easy to just put your mouse just outside of the image and rotate it until that guide is pretty much sitting right on your horizon. Now, notice that it automatically cropped some of the image. I don't have to let it do that. Notice how the areas like out here, if I want to say keep this over here, and now I've got this section of the sky I have to replace, I can go up here to where it says File. Right now it's defaulting to transparent, but I'm going to open that up and choose Generative Expand or Content Aware Fill. Honestly, in this case, they'll probably both work okay. If you're just expanding sky, Content Aware Fill should work. But since there are some areas down here now that would need to get expanded, like this wall, I would say Generative Expand might be a better option. I'm going to go ahead and click that to turn it to Generative Expand. And nothing will happen until I hit the return button. So let's go ahead and maybe extend this up a little bit, maybe even take it to the left just a touch. And even though we have these areas where there's no pixels, as soon as I hit return, Generative Expand should fill those in. Let's go ahead and hit return and let it go to work. And there you can see that it is expanding. And it appears to be doing, well, doesn't appear to be doing anything yet. We'll see how it looks. Okay, so whenever you do a generative expand, take a minute and zoom in and decide whether or not you can live with that. Okay, so obviously recreating a chain or a wrought iron fence is not something that is going to be easy for Photoshop. Extending these stairs is not something that's easy for Photoshop, and I would argue that it failed in its attempt to do that. The sky looks great. Right up here looks good. If it was just extending part of the bowl, I think it did a pretty good job down here, because again, it's just not that much to extend. It's mostly textures, and it does a good job of following the tile lines. But I would definitely say that this right here looks pretty wonky. And for that reason, I would probably turn the crop tool back on and just take it over a little bit to get out some of that wonky fence over there, and then hit return again. All right, what else do we need to fix? Well, photo looks pretty good overall. I would say these people in the back are a little distracting. So why don't we use generative fill to remove them and see if we get a better result. I know this guy right here would be no problem. I don't think he would be much problem, but this one with the head over the fence might be a problem. Also, notice as we look down at our layers that our generative expand is on its own layer. For the sake of, oh, and I also forgot to mention that there are variations. So notice, look at the fence right here as I click through these variations. You can see it's subtle, and none of them are great. They're all blurry, and they're all, again, doesn't look great. Will anybody notice it when they zoom out? Probably not, but I notice it. All right, so let's remove these guys. Now, before we remove them, just for the sake of simplicity, let's flatten these layers out. And what I mean by that is let's take the generative expand and the background layer and let's turn them both into one layer. And we could click Shift, select them both, and right-click and choose Merge Layers. But instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to merge them while keeping these two layers separate. And the way we do that is by hitting Shift, Command, Option, E. Okay, so what it just did there was it flattened those two layers into one layer. But if for any reason I change my mind or I want to go back and make adjustments, I can just delete this top layer and I still have access to the other two layers. I'm going to Command Z because I don't want to do that. Oh man, I thought it would bring me my layer back. I'm going to go Image, I'm going to go Edit, Redo Layer, Edit, Redo Layer, Edit, Redo Layer. And then I'm going to hit Shift, Option, Command E one more time. And that gives me, as you can see, a flattened version of the two layers underneath it. And again, Shift, Option, Command E, that's going to be Shift, I think Alt, Control E on a PC. Okay, now that we have one flattened version at the top of our layer stack, and if for any reason it doesn't put this at the top of your layer stack, select it and drag it to the top. And then we'll come over here and we'll get our marquee tool and let's just select this skateboarder here loosely, and we'll see if generative fill can remove him. Now I'm just gonna, in this window, you can either type remove, you can just hit a period and hit generate. And we'll see if it can give us a passable background. All right, that looks awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that for all this stuff. At least all the people. Looks like I went a little bit too high there. I'm going to go just a little bit below his feet and go up, trace him out. And again, just come up to generative fill. I'm going to type in a period and hit return. And that should remove him as well. And again, there's multiple versions of this that you can use to see. Maybe if the first one doesn't look great, you can click on the second or third one. Okay, so that happens sometimes. And I have no idea why. Like, why was it okay to remove this guy, but for this one it's decided we need a kid cut off at the legs? Doesn't make any sense. So let's try this one. Okay, another bizarre, ridiculous thing to put in there. Let's try this one. Again, equally bizarre. But the light was probably the best out of all of them, so I'm going to go ahead and use that one. And what we could actually do would be to use the stamp tool to cover that up, or use the spot healing brush. But in order to do that, I need to flatten these layers out again so I can select from over here, because right now that light lives on its own little layer. So in order to, I'm going to take these top three layers, and I'll do that by holding Shift and clicking on each of the three. And I'm going to right click and choose Merge Layers. That way those two changes are now flattened into that layer. And now I could come over here and potentially either use the stamp tool, or let's start with the spot healing brush first. It's the one right here. It looks like a band-aid with a little thing around it. And let's just click and drag over this and see if we can remove it. Oh, that looks pretty good. All right, I can live with that. Moving on. Let's get this last guy out of the shot, and then we'll do one more thing and call it done. So last guy, we'll come over here with the lasso tool. We'll drag under his feet, under his skateboard. We'll come around here and keep it loose so it has a little room around the edge. And there we go. Once again, hit period and hit return. Cross our fingers, and hopefully this works. But as you can see, like, I never expect everything automated to work. I know that usually it won't. So it's the way we do this is we use some automated tools, we use some manual tools. But usually by using both, we can get good results. So it put another bag over there. That one looks pretty good. I think I'd go with this one right here. So I'm choosing the middle option. All right. And now let's zoom out. So our image is looking pretty good. We've cleaned up the people out of the background. We've fixed the crop. We've fixed the level. Let's go ahead and grab our selection tool. I'm gonna grab this guide and drag it out of the way. And the last thing I want to do is add a little vignette. So you heard me saying that I don't like vignetting using the auto vignettes, but there is a way to do it that I do like, and this is it. So with your color picker set to black, and if it's not set to black, just click this little black box right above it. For example, if I say I was using purple, and now you can see that in that box is a little magenta square. If I click this box right above it, it resets it to black and white. So with that set to black, let's come down to our adjustment layers. Let's go to gradient. And you can see that we've just added a linear gradient to this image, which is darkening the bottom half of the image. So let's go ahead and in the gradient fill window, let's set that to, from linear, let's set it to radial. Then let's go down to where it says reverse, and let's reverse it. And you can see what I'm getting at here. Now we've got a vignette. Let's go to where it says scale, and we'll bump that up to just so that so we lose the dark areas. And we could maybe bring it down just a touch. I'd say right about 136, 140 should be good. Now I don't like it like this, just to be clear. We're going to add one more thing to it. But just to review, we set it to black for our foreground color. We added a gradient. We set it to radial. I'm going to leave the angle at 90. I'm going to set the scale to right around 130, 140. I'm going to reverse it because I don't want it in the middle. And then I'll click OK. Now, what I like to do at this point is I like to make sure that the gradient is selected. And I like to go up to my blend modes, which currently say normal. But if I go down to overlay or soft light in particular is the one I generally use. What it's doing is it's using that black area not so much as, it's not coloring it black, it's using it to map darker blues into that area. So notice if I go to overlay, it's pretty dark, and that's not bad. But soft light just is a little lighter touch, so I'm going to choose that. So again, the point is that we don't see any of that black pixels, but we do see darker blue and darker grays wherever that vignette is. If I turn the eyeball on and off, you can see that it's vignetting, but it's using the colors that already exist in the image rather than adding black to that. All right, so that's it for our editing. Let's go ahead and choose File, Export, Export As. And the reason we're going to use this is because this image is huge. It's 5,400 by 3,892. And we're going to go ahead and where it says height, let's drop that down to 2,000. It'll automatically adjust the width if we just click here. And we'll set the quality to best. And now we can see that we've taken this from a 35 megabyte image down to about a 1.3 megabyte image. Let's hit export and let's turn this in through Canvas. All right, guys, I hope that you learned a lot about Camera Raw and about masking. Again, this is really a great example of what I do to just about every photo that matters to me. So, hope you learned something here, and looking forward to seeing your versions. All right, that'll do it.